in the order of progressive study, each accompanied with a detailed discussion. I will be showing you 5 different composers to better expose your student to the French modern style. It is possible to use all 5 pieces with one student in a graduated manner. However, if you want to pick and choose from this collection to more closely reflect where your student's current level is, that works as well. So I just kind of call this my own mini collection, and I'm so thrilled to be sharing it with you today. These solo piano works equip the student with the skills necessary to play more difficult repertoire in the French 20th century style. I will discuss some examples as we go, and you'll find things such as embracing colorful sonorities, incorporating complex rhythms, meter changes, utilizing special pedaling. All these things will be brought out in these 5 pieces that I am sharing with you today. And I also wanted to mention before we dive in that these pieces are also suitable for adult students. If you have some adult students studying with you, the music published by Billaudot lacks colorful artwork and the large fonts for pieces that are often used for young children. So it actually can go for any age group. And if you're thinking, wow, this would really work for my adult student, you would find this a great benefit for them as well. All right, so we're going to get started now with the first piece, and this is entitled Je by Darius Milhaud. Milhaud was born in 1892 and died in 1974. And just in case you're not very familiar with some of these French composers, I'll pause at the beginning of each piece and give a brief bio about each composer. He was born to a Jewish family, of course, in France, and Milhaud is often recognized as a member of the well-known Les Six, a group of musicians / composers studying at the Paris Conservatory. He did immigrate to the United States in 1940. He held teaching posts at Mills College and the Aspen Music Festival. He returned to France after 1971, and he became a professor of composition at the Paris Conservatory. He was a prolific composer, and he is unique in that he willingly and purposely composed music for amateurs and young children, as well as writing for many different genres. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick overview of this piece, Je. And the title is actually translated to English as game or play, which I think is really fun. He composed this piece about 1950. It's a miniature waltz, but it definitely has the modern sound. And it's attractive because it's simplistic and it's short. It's specifically written for young pianists of modest technique. Milhaud uses longer note values on the downbeat, so that's typical of the waltz style. There's a consistent 4-bar grouping, creating an accessible phrase structure for a young and inexperienced performer. And so you can see on the slide that it's an ABA form. There's 52 measures total, and it's about 2 pages long on the Billaudot edition. The A section measures 1 through 20. The B section, a bit shorter, measures 21 through 33, and then we finish up 34 through 52 at the return of the A prime section. There's some unique features about this piece that I am delighted to share with you. It has modes. So instead of using just the major or minor keys, we find that he is using modes throughout this piece. It's a great way to introduce this topic to your student or maybe review with your student. The Mixolydian mode is used most throughout this piece. And so if you're trying to remember which one was the Mixolydian mode, it's basically the major scale with a flat 7. He also uses a little bit of the Dorian mode later in the piece, which basically is the natural minor scale, but with the 6th note raised half a step. The A section begins, so this is measures 1 through 8. You can follow along in some of the examples showing behind me. So in measures 1 through 8, you'll see the C Mixolydian scale, and the inclusion of the black key B flat here is creating that half step that's expected between the 6th and 7th scale degrees of this mode. The following 4-bar group, measures 9 through 12, begins in D Mixolydian mode found in example 1-5. So these measures together represent the opening measures transposed up half a step here at measures 9 through 12. So this is transposition up half a step. So we have right off the bat a beautiful example of the Mixolydian mode. And then at the end of the A section, we kind of get to the end of this first section. We have a return to C major. And so you find a clear use of the tonic and the dominant chords with the conclusion of this section. Section B, there is a 4-measure unit that does seem to center on C Dorian, that's measures 25 through 28. And then when we return to that A section at the end of the piece, we actually conclude instead of a major 5 to 1 progression, we are actually doing G minor, the minor 5 chord going to a 1. So again, we're hinting a little bit of that B flat from C Mixolydian is creeping back into that final progression of chords, a minor 5 to a 1. So just giving you a little idea there of the modes and the tonal centers that he is using for this piece. Now I'm going to move forward to the pedagogical highlights that I want to talk to you about for Je. The articulation is uncomplicated for an elementary student. There's no staccato required. The slur is the primary articulation goal, but the good news is all marked slurs are just simply 1 measure in length and use adjacent notes and fingering. So you can see this in the example below. So there's 3 measures here. You notice in the first measure, the right hand has the legato marked in the D, E, F passage, and then the left hand on the second measure shown, you're seeing the left hand duads, the 2-note chords there with legato, and then a little bit of the right hand returning on that last set of 2 measures, you see the legato phrasing there. So very simplistic, nothing too stressful for the students. The tempo here is marked without haste or hurry. And so that's advantageous. We're not in a big hurry for these young performers. You can take your time. It's also interesting to note here that Debussy's piece, Le Plus Coulant, translating as slower than slow, shares this character of an unhurried waltz tempo. So I just wanted to point that out. That's a really neat connection. The tempos are very similar here, and they're both in this waltz timing. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on fingering. That's always a big question mark, and this is a great place to start a student with the elementary level. The fingering here in Je does include notes both inside and outside the 5-finger hand position. The fingering suggested in this billet-doux edition does provide guidance, although there are a few places where you might consider some alternative options. So this is the first example I'm sharing with you here. The left hand is covering an entire range of an octave within measures 1 through 3. So you notice the first half note there in measure 1. Left hand, we have this middle C, and then by the end of measure 3, we're an octave lower on that C there. So how do we get the hand to cover that distance? And I'm assuming with younger students here, maybe not quite comfortable with the full octave span. So the billet-doux edition here marked in the small print right underneath the bass clef, you see that the 2 to 3, we're starting with the middle C on finger 2, turning the thumb under the B flat, and then we have A, 5th finger D, so just a 5-finger position. And then you could do a 2nd finger on G and stretch down to that fifth finger on the C. So there's a little bit of a stretch there. You see in the larger format marked letter B that I suggest you could do 5 or 1 5 1 5 2 5-finger positions and just shift down one white key. So either option would be very easy to implement with your student. In example 2, you'll notice that the right hand plays all 8 tones found in a scale. I do want to be careful here. The composer is not seeking to establish a tonal center, but the fingering use can still be borrowed from scalar passages. So one such passage found in example 1-5 is from measures 9 through 12. And so we start on E, we move through F sharp G all the way till we reach the next highest E, an octave above that. So the right hand can easily use the scale fingering from E major or E minor, really. So the 1, 2, 3 cross under 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this ascending pattern gives you a perfect place to insert that scale fingering. It's kind of a fun fact here I just wanted to point out. The D mixolydian in measures 9 through 12 here shares the same pitch group with G natural minor. So I like to find little tidbits of information to share with students, and so you might find that interesting. All right, also the use of scale fingering addresses hand extensions and helps students to immediately plug in knowledge they already possess. So it's a win-win situation there. Tackling the ever-present fingering puzzle in smaller works like Je is valuable, and in this case could eventually translate to a bigger piece, such as Debussy's Children's Corner, the Jimbo's Lullaby about the elephant here. This piano work begins with a left-hand solo that can be played within the 5-finger or pentatonic hand position, but then moves into more extended hand positions, obviously. So you can see here on the clip below the fingering marked with the letter B is alternative fingers that uses a stronger 3rd and 4th finger on the repeated notes C and D. But the letter A keeps everything within that 5-finger motion. So all the way through those opening measures of Jimbo's Lullaby, you could use that 5-finger position. So just showing you a little tidbit of something from a larger piece, a larger French piece. So at the end of each piece, I will pause and we'll talk about for what students would this piece be appropriate. So I said, well, we're using scalar finger patterns. There's no pedaling, the textures are thin, there's a limited dynamic range, the tempo without haste, that's a plus, a familiar ABA form set up in the modern style. The largest interval span is an octave, and at times, Mio even creates this distance between 2 hands instead of just the 1 hand that we discussed. So in my conclusion, I said, well, I think this is appropriate for an elementary level student who's already begun training in the basic piano techniques and desires to study the modern style. Would I give this to a student with a month of lessons? No, but maybe they've been studying for 2 or 3 years and are ready to move into something a little more challenging. So that would be who I would suggest could study this piece.
So we'll pause here, and if you want to unmute, we just want to give everybody a chance. If you've played this piece or taught this piece before, or if you have any comments or thoughts you'd like to share before we go on to the second one. Oh my, everybody's very quiet.
I'm hesitant to bring this up, but as you were playing, it was played so beautifully, and I was thinking that a student would find that those shaping of those phrases and those very subtle crescendos and decrescendos might be a little difficult for a very early student. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, that's a very good point too. I performed these, I think, with the highest artistic level in mind. You know, you want to put the best out there that you can, but I think you are correct. There's going to be challenges. You don't want to give this to a brand new student, but I think I would probably, I haven't taught this particular piece. I have taught the other ones in this collection, but I think that with this piece, I would maybe focus on 1 or 2 areas where I wanted to have some shaping and focus there. And then, like I said, we have the, you know, it's no staccato, legato, just kind of focusing on those technical aspects and say, well, let's make this smooth here. And this, you know, is not staccato there. Make sure your tempo doesn't rush. So I think I would probably just kind of limit and give them things that they could work towards. And, you know, maybe one day they'll go all the way with it as they continue to study. But yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that out. Anyone else have thoughts, suggestions, please? I'd love to hear.
I thought it was a very interesting piece. And the ending reminded me of Eric Satie a little with that rhythm.
That's a good point. I didn't think of that. Oh, I like that comment. Okay. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. I always like to see what others have to say.
What piano were you playing on in that?
So yeah, this is a very special piano to me. It was made in 1836. It's a 7-foot grand. It has been redone on the keys and the strings in the 1980s. And then I purchased it in the early 2000s. It's a Chickering grand piano, so it's not a Steinway. But we purchased it. Actually, my husband is probably grinning over there. But yeah, this was our first piece of furniture. We didn't even have a house. We bought a piano. That's when you know your husband loves you. If he lets you buy a piano before you even buy a kitchen table, it's like. But yeah, so it's I just actually had it serviced and got all of the felt pads and all of that reserviced and so forth. But yeah, it's definitely an antique, but the keys have all been replaced. So all the working parts are replaced, but the body of it is very you can see a little bit of it there. The body of it is very heavy. It takes about 6 grown men to move it because it's that really heavy wood. It has wooden pegs inside holding it together instead of the traditional screws. So it's kind of fun, but yeah. Oh, there's Laura, I think. Did it sound different to you than a regular? Could you hear anything different? I'm just curious. I don't know.
Well, it's a little hard to tell, over Zoom. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The quality isn't always equal to what you hear in real life. Yeah.
Well, and it just looked, I just couldn't quite picture it because I could see these metal legs, but that wasn't the piano's legs. It was something else. Yes.
So you can see behind me, that's the recording camera. And then the metal is the stand. So it doesn't, I didn't want the camera sitting on the piano. So, and I don't know what it's called. Stephen,
Okay.
my husband does all of that. So he set all that up for my YouTube channel. So yeah. That's what the metal legs are for. It's not.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, it does. I thought about that. Like that might look kind of weird. Like what piano has metal legs? Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, friends. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and let us move forward to the second piece. So, Stephen, when you want to play that, if you're ready, we're ready. All right, if you want to move your
The second piece that I'm sharing with you today is quite a long title in French. So it's Petite Suite Cerise pour concert d'Euphonie by Betsy Jolas. And it translates in English as a serious petite suite for family concert. Betsy Jolas was born in 1926 and she is still living. So that puts her at 95 years old. So not only do we get to talk about a female composer, but she is one of the, she is the only one in this set of 5 pieces that is still living. So a little bit of background about Jolas, just in case you're not familiar with her work. She studied at the Paris Conservatory under Messiaen and Milhaud, and she was actually a prodigy also of Pierre Boulez. She holds many awards and honors for her compositions. In 1975, she became the professor of analysis at the Paris Conservatory, and she succeeded her former teacher, Messiaen, and later became the professor of composition at that same institution. So we'll move now to a little bit of an overview about the piece. This suite has 5 total movements, but they're very short, as indicated by the title. The shortest movement is only 9 bars long, and the entire piece in the Billaudot edition is just 2 pages. That's it for all 5 movements. Each movement is in a different meter, so we'll talk about that a little more. And there's 1 note per hand or 2-part, playing a thin texture. Like a Baroque era suite, Jolas includes the function of each movement in the titles. So you'll see the movements titled Prelude, Etude, Danse, for example. Unlike the typical Baroque era suite, only the 4th movement has repeated material. There are no key signatures used, although some accidentals are present, and modern stylistic elements are used in each movement. We're going to pause and play the piece here. If you'll take a listen with me. And now we'll follow with a pedagogical discussion of the piece. It's best to ID the use of 5-finger hand positions throughout each of these 5 movements. So I really feel that her compositional strategy here throughout the suite was using 5-finger hand positions in all of the movements. So the way she approaches it is these 5-finger hand positions can promote performance in different registers and locations on the instrument. So it's very exploratory. Jolas does not attempt to validate a specific tonal center, but she rather explores the pitch possibilities available within those 5-finger spans chosen. So it really creates this fun, exploratory approach for students and helps them to avoid getting stuck with the concept of one hand position. I know years ago when I first started teaching, some of the most popular repertoire books had the students stay within this kind of middle C hand position for, depending on how long the student stayed in the book, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And by the time you moved from C position and started going, well, this is G position, I remember the student would just be so kind of flabbergasted, like it's a whole new world when we move hand positions. So Jolas is bringing in, well, it could be D, E, F sharp, G, A, or D, E, F natural, G, A. So she's very open about different possibilities here, and I think that's great for our students. Okay, so I'm going to do a few excerpts here. So the first movement is titled Entree, and it focuses on the D and the C 5-finger hand positions in the right hand. The left hand is going to focus on the F and the D 5-finger positions. So I'm going to bring you to the piano here and show you exactly what this looks like. On the second movement, we have mobile 5-finger hand positions. So this is explored in both the left and the right hand. Notice it's just one hand at a time. The left hand is outlining the interval of a fifth, and there's a descending sequence in the right hand where we start with the C 5-finger position, and we have the D, the E 5-finger positions in this right hand part. So we'll take a moment and I'll bring you to the piano and show you exactly what this one looks like. On the fourth movement, which is titled Etude, we have a stationary position. So the right hand, you're right here in the middle of the piano for C position. And then left hand, you're going to be using D position. So these two 5-finger positions are one step apart. So it's kind of a fun technical issue to work with on your student. Your hands are in close proximity. And as you see on the screen, I will play this excerpt and you can look at how close the proximity of the two hands are. All right, and so we'll talk about a repertoire link to other French pieces of a larger scale. So I'm moving to a Debussy piece. His piece, Voiles or Sail, from his first book of preludes, is larger, obviously more advanced than Jolas's piece that we're discussing here today. Yet the similar use of 5-finger positions is a technical skill needed in both pieces. Sails features pentatonic scales made up of whole steps, and this pattern also lends itself to the concept of mobile 5-finger hand positions. So there's an example that I'll share with you on the screen found in measures 48 and 49. This is example 2-4. Each hand plays the pentatonic scale F sharp, G sharp, B flat, or if you want to stay with sharp, A sharp, C, and then D. So moving up in whole steps. And then after that 5-finger pattern, Debussy moves the hand up a whole step and begins another pentatonic scale, starting with A flat or G sharp and harmonically. So this is what's showing on your screen here. And then there's a second piece I'll point out, also by Debussy. We're focusing on Debussy for a moment. And this is an exercise based off of Czerny, of course. And it's a play on these 5-finger exercises that Czerny is so famous for. The beginning 6 measures, which I show in the example below, feature a left-hand C 5-finger position over the right hand, which is inserting this recurring A flat. And despite this very simplistic opening statement, I do want to say, of course, the piece is quite sophisticated with multiple tempo changes, meter changes. It has quick rhythms and ornaments, so I'm not taking away from that. But the use of 5-finger hand positions, however, is featured prominently throughout Debussy's work here, as well as in Jolas's Petite Suite. As I mentioned in the opening statements about this work, there are 5 different meters, so every movement is in a different meter. The entree is in 2/4 time. Prelude, the second movement, is in 6/8 time. So here, Jolas is encouraging the pianist to group the notes into the larger 2 beats per measure. She does this by indicating the tempo in terms of the dotted quarter note and stemming almost every measure in 2 groups of 3/8 notes, which is customary for this meter. So you can see this in example 2-3 above. Although 2/4 and 6/8 are different, primarily because they designate different note values as equaling 1 beat, both of these time signatures do focus the pulse of the music into 2 beats per measure. I'm going to move to the third movement, which is titled Duo, and it's in 3/4 time. The fourth movement, Etude, moves into new territory. It's in 5/8. So this is grouping the rhythm into groups of 3 and 2 beats at a time. Using this approach allows this unusual time signature to be transformed into recognizable units, counting 3s and 2s together. In the Billaudot edition, the stemming of the 3/8 notes together, followed by a single quarter note in the right hand, shows support of this approach. So you can see this in the example I'm providing. The first measure there in the right hand, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So it's very easily seen the way that they stem it in the Billaudot edition. So it seems like, wait, 5/8 timeout. Where 5/8 just came out of nowhere. I mean, we're moving along 2/4, 6/8, 3/4, 5/8. Like, where does that come from? So I'm looking at 5/8 as a combination of 2 plus 3 beats per measure. Then this fourth movement is not taking away from the progression of meters, but reiterating the sum of what has already been used. So I thought that was actually quite clever of her to kind of slip in this modern time signature. Maybe your student hasn't seen this before, but it's in a way that it's very plausible and able to be accomplished by a student. The last movement, the fifth movement, Dance, is in 4/4 time, and it should be considered as the final installment of the path, starting with 2, 3, 2 plus 3, and lastly, 4 beats per measure. So I just wanted to share that with you on all of those meters. Seems a little overwhelming, but actually a very nicely charted journey of meters. So let's conclude this discussion. For what students would this piece be appropriate? Thinking through the students you have in your studio, I would say this piece is suitable for a late elementary or early intermediate student, ready to explore mobile 5-finger positions in a modern style, of course. This is a multi-movement work. However, each section is quite short in length and fairly undemanding. The piece is attractive to a less experienced student. There's an absence of pedaling, lack of heavy textures, simplistic voicing. Legato and staccato are the primary articulation goals. And this charming suite is extremely valuable. And that while it is small in size, it definitely has much to offer.
Okay, friends. So has anyone played or heard that piece before? Was it new for anybody, or was it familiar territory? Oh, can you unmute yourselves? I can't hear you.
This is totally new. for me.
Totally new for you? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm seeing some head nods. Okay. Okay, great. Well, I was hoping to introduce something new. So I bet you never know. Everybody, we've got such an amazing amount of experience and performers, teachers in this group. So I wanted to know someone else. I always want to get other insights. I value that so much. So any responses, reactions? Did you agree with me, disagree with me? Did you like what you heard? Have other thoughts that maybe I didn't cover?
Well, to me, it sounds like a French Bartok.
I like that. Yes, I could see that. Thank you. Yeah. Was there something in particular in one of the movements or just as a whole?
As a whole, I was thinking of the microcosmos.
Yeah, microcosm.
Yeah, exactly. I felt like, and I love that Betsy Jolas, unless she died just recently, she's still living. When I just looked her up a few weeks ago. I wish I had a way to get in contact with her. I wish I could have had a conversation. Of course, I don't know. I'm assuming she would speak English, but she may only speak French. But I love the way she put this piece together. And I wish I had some way to ask her more about what her thoughts were. Maybe she was influenced by Bartok. I don't know, but that's an amazing comment. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. Anyone else want to comment? Okay.
Well, my only other thought was just, how to get the student to want to play that piece. Like,
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
like,
What response do you get from students? How do you encourage them to try this because they want something typically?
Yeah. It is in the modern style. So this was kind of, and for me, I was doing this as a graduate student. I was kind of like, I was thinking the same thing, to be really honest. Like, how do you get, because they want to play jazz or boogie or, boogie woogie kind of stuff, or they want to play the smaller Bach pieces or the small sonatinas or, and I thought, with this piece, it has such a range of emotion that maybe even if I can't convince them to do all 5 movements, maybe they could choose 2 out of the 5. I'm a little partial to the second movement, the prelude with the mobile 5-finger positions, because to me it was very lyrical. And though, some students really feel that connection to lyricism. And so to me, I thought that one I can go for. I think I can convince, I have some students in my mind that I was like, that would work for them. But like the one where the hands are crossed over, some of my little boys especially, they like things that are like, super power piano stuff. And so
yeah.
I was kind of like, I think that one it's kind of like, oh, mom, look at me, look at my friend, I'm going to show you. So I kind of thought that one for me had a special value of its own. And the other thing that was really pleasant, I didn't get a chance to say in this recording, but and the writing that I did is that Jolas actually says play without any nuances, without any dynamics on that piece. It's just like straightforward, da, da, dee, da, it's like just clockwork. And so, if you have a student who's not very well versed yet, or maybe they're just not good at being expressive, this would be it. Just focus on getting the really cool hand position, the piggyback, and counting carefully 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, if nothing else, or blueberry, strawberry, whatever you can put in there to make them get it. And it's short. So, they could really say, wow, I played 2 whole movements, but it was really, maybe 18 measures total at the most. So that was kind of my approach. Yes, it's hard to get the entire thing. And it's a different style for a lot of them. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I like the idea that it doesn't have to be necessarily about how the piece sounds as much as like a skill to show off.
yeah, especially that movement. To me, it just captured my imagination, because I could just see students in my mind like, yeah, this movement would work for that student right there, and so it has very musical movements, and then the ones with just that really cool step hand position apart. So yeah, that's kind of my approach to it. That's what I was thinking, is kind of, if you needed to split it up, you could. Yeah. Okay, anyone else want to comment before we go to piece 3? I've got 5 to get through, so I do want to keep us moving. I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to hear your comments. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, all right, so we'll move on. So this will be our 3rd piece coming. And if you'll mute yourself, please.
The third piece we're focusing on today is Les Fleurs endormies by Marcel Landowski. It translates as The Sleeping Flowers. Landowski was born in 1915 and he died in 1999. He also studied at the Paris Conservatory. And his grandfather, Henri Woutin, is actually a recognized composer and violinist himself. So you may not have known about that connection between Landowski and Woutin. Landowski is very interesting. He actually held a dual career. Not only was he a composer, he also was a high-ranking officer in France's Ministry of Culture starting in 1960. So he was the Inspector General of Music Education and later head of the National Department of Music in 1964 and 1970, respectively. He influenced changes in areas such as opera reform and by establishing musical groups and events. He earned the commendation of being one of the central figures in French musical life during the last 3 decades of the 20th century. And it's rather interesting that he died 1999, right at the turn of the century. Okay, so we're going to move on to a discussion of the piece, just a brief overview to share with you. It is an impressionistic style piece with a beautiful flowing legato melody. The opening measures present these full upper register triads in both hands, brings to mind that lush tone of Debussy. And there's also colorful sonorities portraying the impression of sluggishness or tiredness, often associated with sleeping. So The Sleeping Flowers is the title once again. And this kind of colorful sonority, he brings us in mostly by the use of some very well-placed accidentals. We'll talk about that a little later. This form is a succinct ABA form. You can see I've written it out for us here. The first 9 measures is the A section, followed by B measures 10 through 15, and then a return to A prime measure 16 through 24. And lastly, this piece has a large dynamic range from forte to pianissimo. So that's kind of a fun point to make as you explore this piece with your student. We're going to pause and play the piece here. I'm going to briefly mention that articulation and fingering is so important in this piece, as you just heard. And actually, there's so many points that I just love to spend all day discussing with these 5 pieces, but I'm just trying to narrow down each of the pedagogical focuses to just kind of one main point. But I did want to mention the articulation and fingering. You've got to have these beautiful legato phrasings. It's important in every measure. You need that technique of legato fingering. And the B section in measures 10 through 12 especially offers an interesting study in articulation. You have the left hand marked, as you see on the screen, with legato, mezzo piano, and then legato for the right hand marked mezzo forte, and then later moving on up to the forte. So you have 2 different articulations being performed simultaneously there. And the fingering, the first problem really That initial measure, you see connecting 3 legato triads is required in both hands with the melody in the right hand, that upper right hand voice. So being able to talk about that and work on the voicing issues is going to be a big point about this piece. A similar voicing issue is found in the repeated chords in measures 4 through 5. This one's also shown in the musical example below. And so that is just one more example of where you're going to need those beautiful legato phrasings. My main focus for the pedagogical discussion is pedaling. We haven't had a piece yet that focused on pedaling or even needed pedaling, but there's no pedal markings in Landowski's score, but the damper pedal is certainly needed at times to best capture the sound of this impressionistic piece, even with legato fingering. As legato slurs are the primary articulation, the use of the syncopated pedal is the best choice because it ensures the seamless flow of notes and triads is sustained. So option 1 that you could discuss with your student is pedaling with the harmonic rhythm. So you can see this below at example 3-5 letter A. So the pedaling here would then follow the chord changes. The syncopated pedaling was our basic play, then pedal technique. The pedal could be held through the half note on the last half of the measure while the left hand plays the staccato 4th beat. So this is what I'm showing you here on the screen. So these are the options. So this is option A that I'm just discussed. And then option 2 would be you could try pedaling twice the measure. This is located at option B on the musical example there. Same excerpt, just looking for letter B. So you could pedal twice a measure at the half note rhythm, and this creates more of a synthesis of the 2 triads on beats 1 and 2 that results in this lovely shimmer of sound. More impressionistic, basically. So I will demonstrate this here with an audio clip if you can listen along with me. Connecting these first 2 triads definitely opens up a higher plane of sonority, and that more closely fits the impressionistic style. I think it's more appreciated, and as your student gets more comfortable with the style, I think they'll begin to appreciate it as well. The first half of measure 3, so we'll move on to the next musical example, continues this idea of synthesis. So we're juxtaposing half steps and whole steps here. And you notice in the left hand, I'm looking at a horizontal group of notes, and then we'll talk about linear. So, horizontal versus vertical. So in the left hand, we have this cluster at the very beginning of the measure, B and C. I'm looking at the half notes here on the bottom, really close together. And so that would be a half step there, B to C. The upstem notes in the left hand, so the G and then the A moving to the right, the second quarter note there, that would be the whole step. And then I'm going to direct your attention to the top, the right-hand part. So the top upstem notes, E down to D there, would be our whole step. And then if you look back at the first beat and looking at it vertically, you see consonant intervals of a 3rd and a 4th. So you have the right hand, obviously B up to E played together, so that's an interval of a 4th. And then in the left hand, you have 2 sets of 3rds, C to E and E to G, all this played on that downbeat here. So again, just noticing the synthesis of these notes all blending together, half steps along with whole steps at the same time. Okay, so other examples of harmonic pedaling could be found in measures 4 and 19, and this is the example 3-7 on your screen. Here, the right hand's rhythmic structure and the use of the triadic pitch collections are similar to measures 1 and 2. You can see that right off. Even though the left hand is more active, the use of syncopated pedaling on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd beats allows the accompanimental 8th notes to blend in nicely with the right hand in measure 19. And I'll play an excerpt for you here. The student may find it interesting to notice how measure 7's rhythm is actually a mirror image of measures 1 through 2, 4, and 19. So therefore, with that mirror image, you could actually say the pedal is backwards, with the half note being the first part of the measure instead of the second part of the measure. So I like to find little interesting tidbits. So you can see those 3 measures together. The measure in the middle is the rhythm backwards, where you would pedal the half note 2 beats there and then change with beat 3, beat 4, whereas the examples on the outer, the first and the third example, has a half note at the last part of those measures. Now, when we talk about pedal, the other discussion is, should we use a full pedal here, full depression of the pedal? Should we have a shallow or partial pedal? So while the A section is filled with legato slurs, the pedal must be handled with care so that the musical intentions of the composer are not clouded. Isn't that a sermon we preach all the time to our students? Use the pedal carefully. The use of partial or shallow pedals is important here. A full depression of the damper pedal in sections with that active left hand, those eighth notes accompaniments, get my words out here, such as found in measures 4 through 9, we showed that earlier, creates balance and texture problems. So you don't want to have just this complete sludge going on with the full depression of the pedal. So using shallow or partial pedals still allows for fullness and connectivity, yet it doesn't cloud the texture. There are a few places in which the full pedal would be a benefit, however. So the initial bars of the A section with its full-bodied chords and both hands, you could really gain a richer sonority with the full use of the pedal. And another example would be the final half note tones at the fermata and measure 9 and 24. So this is actually the halfway point and then the last measure of the piece. This is shown in example 3-9 on your screen. So these final half note tones are brought together with the damper pedal, allowing these dissonant E to E flat pitches to blend together. So this is a beautiful example, and I think this is really where you have some tone painting from the composer. This is where the flowers are kind of nodding off, falling to sleep there. So I'll play this again using the full pedal, full depression of the pedal. Now, I do want to comment, the damper pedal is not needed at all for the majority of the B section. So this is found in measures 10 through 15, mostly because there's a light staccato accompaniment in the left hand, and it's very energetic. It propels the tempo forward here. So using the pedal would kind of negate that whole action. The right hand then is solely responsible for the legato phrasing, and this is accomplished with the help of strategic fingering and articulation, which is shown in the billet doux edition. So I'll share a short clip of that with you. No pedal used here. Now there is a little caveat I do want to add in about the pedal. We've talked about the damper pedal. That's mostly where we focus our attention as piano teachers. But there's actually a couple of cases where you might consider with your student using the una corda pedal. And of course, the una corda, this might be the first time your student has used it. It's kind of a special effects for most students. And I think it's a suitable introduction for the intermediate student. And you can shift the hammers, of course, with this pedal to strike only 1 out of 3 strings, hence una, 1 corda, 1 string, una corda. So this una corda pedal creates this mellowness of sound. And there's a couple of spots in the Fleurs endormies where you could really use this as a helpful tool in creating the extremely soft pianissimo or pianissimo, and this enhances that nodding off effect of those sleeping flowers found in the second half of the measures I just mentioned earlier, measures 9 and 24. Now, we always want to link this discussion to a repertoire reference. So the French modern composer Maurice Ravel comes to mind when I'm looking for a comparable example of this technique in, of course, a more difficult piece. His sonatine also demonstrates the need for this lovely legato melodic voice accompanied by 2 lower voices in the right hand. This is the first movement of a sonatine, by the way. This elegant piece is written in sonata form and also has graceful melodies in the right hand. Intentional fingering, yet again, is required to successfully produce that legato line. And I'm showing you here on the screen example 3-3. This is the first ending in the first movement, which leads to a repeat of the exposition. So we can take a listen here. as we lead to the conclusion of our third piece together, for what students would this piece be appropriate? Landowski provides the teacher with a miniature and the impressionistic style. The beauty of this work lies in its simplicity and brevity. The key signature of E minor is familiar. So students learning that relative minor relationship to the major keys, this would be something they could latch onto and bring into their study. Use of a few additional accidentals that show the composer's tone painting. They are present, but not overly so. The phrases are short and articulation brings variety. While there are many opportunities to address issues such as pedaling, fingering, large dynamic contrast, I didn't get a chance to talk about that in this discussion, but there are large dynamic contrasts. This selection is still well within the grasp of an intermediate student with 3 to 5 years of training. So of course, this is dependent on your student's personal needs. So you may have a student that's been studying 5 or 6 years, and this is perfectly within their level. So I'm just giving you kind of a large range. This is about the area that you could assign this to a student.
Okay. Well, welcome back. I wanted to know about this piece. It's very different from the first two that I shared with you. So I just wanted to hear any responses that you had or any thoughts you'd like to share as a performer or a teacher, or both. Karen, I saw you unmuted. Did you have something to share with us?
You know, I love the dissonant note every time it happened. And the ending thing. That just appeals to me tremendously. That
Yeah.
flat, and it had a sense of. And I think the title really helped. I'm thinking about how to present this to a student, and I wondered about the middle section. You know, is that suddenly like the flowers awakening? Because it was so different from the title. Do you have a thought about that?
You know, I thought the same thing, because even the tempo does go faster there. It's marked in the score, and it does sound lively, more energetic. So I kind of had the same idea. I feel like that B section is more, they're waking up. And so maybe the first half of the piece, you know, where you have the nodding off and you pause, that's kind of them going to sleep. And then the B section starts the next morning, and, you know, the sun is coming out, and they've had their coffee and are feeling pretty perky. And then again, you finish with that lovely, you know, falling back asleep at the end of the day. So yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking as well. So yeah, good ear. I love that the accidental is explained, that you can, you know, if a student isn't familiar with this style, and notes that are like, well, why is that E flat in this E minor piece? But like you said, the title really helps in this case.
It gives it a sense of ongoing. It's not, it's finality, but it sort of has a question mark at the end, or, you know, it's not a permanent death. It's just
right. There's hope. Yes, the B section can't come again. Yes. Right.
How long is the piece? How many pages is it?
It's 2 pages total. It's just 2 pages. So I have the score here. So in its entirety. Oh, so there it is. Yeah. So that's it. That's the whole piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's very beautiful. It sounds very sophisticated, but with the repeat of the A section, that helps a lot, because you can recycle some of that opening material, most of it, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead.
Did I miss where the publisher?
So this is all still from one publisher. This is the Billaudot, is the French publisher. Yeah.
Right. And are you saying Billaudot?
Billaudot, yeah. So it's Billaudot. Billaudot, yeah.
D-O-T, okay.
Yeah. So that's, yeah. And I found several of these, like I said, and we can talk some more at the end on Amazon. You can even order from, but we can talk about that a little more at the end of it. Okay, any more questions or comments, discussions about this piece before we go to number 4? I love hearing what you guys have to say. It's very interesting to me, because sometimes you guys have very different views, and I'm just like, oh, I didn't think of that. So I really appreciate it. Okay, I think we're good. All right, I'm gonna mute myself and we'll go on to the next.
So we are now to the fourth out of fifth pieces in our discussion today. Thank you for staying tuned in. This fourth piece is titled À la manière d'un violon by Raymond Loucheur, and that translates to In the Manner of the Violin. More about that later. A little bit about Loucheur. He was born in 1899 and he died in 1979. He's a well-acclaimed composer and teacher, and he studied under Nadia Boulanger and Vincent Dandy, so you may recognize some of those names. His cantata won the Premier Grand Prize of Rome in 1928, and he was awarded the Bizet Prize in 1935. He was actually a predecessor to Landowski, so he also held public office. He was the Chief Inspector of Musical Education, and then later the Inspector General of State Education in 1940 and 1947, respectively. And then later on, he went to be the director of the Paris Conservatory for 6 years, starting in 1956. So 3 major roles there that he played. He composed works for flute, harp, orchestra, chorus, chamber groups, and obviously piano. Loucheur's music is lyrical, yet unashamedly uses chromaticism. So I really love that statement, unashamedly uses chromaticism, and we'll definitely talk about that also a little later. Also want to just include a small personal note. Why did I include this piece? When I was going through, there's 27 pieces total, as I mentioned. This title really stood out to me. I actually am a violinist as well as a pianist, and so when I saw this title, In the Manner of the Violin, I was just intrigued. How can we bring the violin to the piano? What is he talking about? How is this going to work? And so that really, got my interest up, and then I started studying it, and it actually fell in line with my mini collection, with my graduated levels of pieces. So I just wanted to point that out. It's a very personal piece to me, as well as falling into this collection that we are creating together. Throughout music history, the piano has been known to take on various roles, such as mimicking the human voice, various orchestral instruments. The horn call sounded for hunting in the English countryside. Even percussion instruments. You might have a few more that you could add to my list here. There's examples found in many composers' works. Bach, Chopin, Messiaen, also a French modern composer. As indicated by the title of this piece, our focus today imitates the violin. So let me just give you a quick review of the violin. Some of you are already familiar with the instrument, and some of you might need a little bit of a, wait, what was this about exactly? The violin's 4 strings are traditionally tuned a perfect fifth apart. So we start with a low G on, this would be G below middle C is its lowest string, just to kind of give you a gauge of how the lowest pitch would sound on a violin. So the composer uses this interval of a fifth frequently in this composition. He also uses its inversion, which is the fourth. So a fifth, for example, from the G string up to the D string there, that perfect fifth, and then the inversion of the fifth, of course, would be the perfect fourth. So those 2 intervals are used prominently throughout this piece. And then, going back to my quote earlier, he juxtaposes those 2 intervals with the minor second, chromaticism, everywhere. So there's examples of this. If you look right here in the first measure with me, and also in the 4th measure, you see the left hand presenting. Now notice this is treble clef, even though it's the left hand. The notes G and D, and then A and E. So 2 intervals of a perfect fifth side by side. Not only are they the perfect fifth intervals we discussed, they're also representing the lower and upper pairs of open strings on the violin, the G and D, and then the open A and E string. So this would be the complete set of violin strings with the traditional tuning. Now, measure 27 and 29, also in this example, you see the left hand's 2 intervals of a perfect fourth, also again, treble clef, but the left hand is playing here. You see those intervals of a perfect fourth there on the bottom. And then they coincide with the right hand. Now, this is a 6th interval. We have F sharp up to D there. And then that interval, looking at the 8th note rhythms there in the right hand, moves up to G and D. So from F sharp and D, the 6th, to G and D, the perfect fifth. So we have that recurring juxtaposition, 4th and 5th, side by side in those measures. Present are the perfect fifth, its inversion, and then notice that he goes from the perfect 6th or excuse me, the major sixth to the perfect fifth with that half step at the point of resolution there. So that's just a perfect little, in a nutshell, of those points there. And then we have the rolled chords of the right hand. Now this is at measures 42 through 45, and also again at measures 47 through 49, and these are shown. These are also idiomatic of the violin's double stop technique. So if you're not familiar with the violin, we have the bow is able to reach 2 strings at once. We can't play all 4 strings with one bow stroke, but you can get 2 strings in one bow stroke. That's called a double stop there, 2 strings. So you have also the idea of triple and quadruple stops. We have 4 strings. Obviously, the bow cannot play all 4 strings at one time. It's too big a distance for the bow to do in one stroke. But we kind of have this rolled chord arpeggio, brink, there. So I'll play a quick excerpt on the violin so you can see what I'm talking about. So you'll notice the use of the intervals of a perfect fourth, E to A, and the perfect fifth, that same A up to E again. We're reflecting those 2 uppermost strings of the violin. And an interesting correlation here is that the arpeggiated harmony, chosen in measures 42 and 43 specifically, is easily translated to the violin through those open A and E strings. From a violinist's perspective, even the beginning 6 bars could be played on this instrument by using that double stop technique of bowing 2 strings at a time. I'm going to pause here now and let us listen to this entire piece, and we'll come back and do a little bit more discussion. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of chromaticism that is really indicative of Landowski's style as a composer. Here in this piece, we have chromatically altered thematic material or sequences that we're going to focus on for a few moments. So the piece begins with motion propelled by half steps really in both hands, shown in the score excerpt. So measures 1 through 5, in the left hand, we're seeing that G, G sharp, A, and then back to A flat, the enharmonic of G sharp, and returning to our initial G there. So these are chromatic pitches under the tied D, all in the left hand. And so we have above that in measure 2, the right hand half step motion goes through measure 2, it repeats in measure 4, the same A and E there, and then it moves that A to a B flat up that half step. So the right hand's chromaticism is not as big a motion, but you see a slight shift in that bottom right hand note. So it's kind of fun to me to notice on this part that especially the left hand, where you would have the G, G sharp, A flat, G. In my ears as a violinist, that sounds like me tuning. And a lot of times as violinists, we like to play 2 strings at a time to really hear the relative pitches there. Is that a perfect fit? And so then, kind of sound as we're adjusting the pegs or the fine tuners. I feel like that's what he's doing. It's a little tune-up session there. And then on the A and the E string, you hear just like the A, I'm not quite sure if that A is in tune. And so I shifted up just a little bit more sharp. Oh wait, okay, that's B flat, too far, and I go back down. So I found it really amusing. I was just kind of grinning to myself as I was playing this on the piano because I was totally hearing this through the ears of a violinist. Okay, so anyway, back to our chromaticism. Loucheur returns to this thematic idea of chromaticism by using transpositions and inversions of this 3 half-step pattern that I just introduced in measure 1. So measures 41 through 44 is where we're going to focus, and we're leading later to a flourish of half steps on the downbeat of measure 45. So using the left hand's chromatically ascending pitches in the first measure seen above, and example 4-3 as a motive, notice that the pattern is now turned upside down in measure 41. So instead of ascending, we're finding that the notes are descending. This is shown here in the example on the screen. And then this motive is also transposed, beginning with a minor third above the initial G from measure 1. We're now starting with B flat. The final 4 measures of this work again focus on the motive beginning in the right hand, and so this is shown below. And measure 59 moves the motive from the right hand to the left hand, and we have the final E flat leads to a half-step resolution, E flat to D in measure 60. So the composer is actually connecting the first and the last measures of the piece with the left hand's open fifth statement of G and D. Again, those open strings on the violin. The left hand does show other cases where chromatic movement is of high importance. The left hand's the lowest voice is outlining a sequence of half and whole steps in measure 12 through the downbeat of measure 14, G, A flat, A, B flat, and C. So look at the lowest, the downstem note. You can follow that progression there with me. Then this pattern shown in example 4-6 is repeated almost exactly as a transposition. So you see right below that, the second musical excerpt beginning a half step higher at measure 19. So you see again the downstem notes G sharp, A, B, C, and then the last measure D there. So if you put those two together, looking at the first measure of both examples, you see G in the first example, and then the second example is G sharp. So you see that it's just shifted up that half step. Meanwhile, the right hand's upper notes in these same bars, still looking at the same examples, reveal a complementary half step motion that then finishes the musical statement with the intervals of a perfect fourth. So I'm looking on the second system of that previous example, and you see half step motions there. I believe it's B to C on the very first one. And then linking this to some French repertoire, Debussy's Fireworks from Preludes Book Number 2 is where I'm going to point your attention at this time. Students will find that identifying and successfully handling sequences that are altered by transposition are skills also needed in this more advanced piece. The 2 upper staves that I'm showing you in the example introduce a system that is manipulated by neighboring intervals of a second, chromaticism. So in this case, the changing upper voices are indicated with the up stem, while the repeating inner voices have a down stem. So just kind of giving you a little bit of a view. We're just a snapshot, so I'm trying to explain here. Notice how the notes in the second staff repeat the notes from the upper staff an octave lower. In the first 2 bars, the sequence moves in half steps. The upper voice is moving down a minor second. So we have a C sharp to B sharp. And then up a minor second, C sharp to D. But in the following 2 bars, the composer transposes that passage. So we're beginning a fourth higher at F sharp. This is measure 59, initiating a whole step motion moving down a major second. So F sharp down to E. And then we finish here with a major second up, G sharp and then it descends a whole step to F sharp. So not only is there a transposition of the pitches, but also an enlargement of the original half step interval to a whole step. And so this is, of course, a much more complicated work by Debussy using the same skill. A pedagogical note, you heard this in the recording, I did not want to neglect to speak about this, is there are obviously repeated 16th notes as a featured rhythmic motive throughout this work. The function of these notes alternates. Sometimes they have an accompanimental role, and other times it's a melodic role. So it's important for the student to understand the difference between these two primary roles, as well as how to implement the techniques required for each. So I could spend a whole nother session just talking about this particular focus of the piece, but I'm going to mention it because there's a contemporary example in Ravel's piece where you have this ever-present 16th rhythm, and this is found in the Toccata from the Tomb of Couperin, again by Ravel, and it also has a similar function to those in Lesureur's piece. So I'm going to show you here on the screen. And the final outcome of Ravel's piece, these passages, should be a clear layering of textures, resulting in an easily heard counterpoint at the 8th note, accompanied by the rhythmically active 16ths. And as we conclude our 4th piece here, for what students would this piece be appropriate? So I'm thinking at least an upper intermediate level student would find this piece within their grasp. Pupils at this level, we're thinking they've already encountered some balancing issues between the hands. They probably have experience with chromaticism from previous studies and have also addressed the idea of alternating fingering, which is something that will come up in this piece. The use of basic intervals, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, intervals of a half and a whole step, creates this comfortable reach for the hand, so that's very doable. The range of this piece covers the middle to upper registers of the piano, encompassing about 2.5 octaves total. As a result, the student is not required to play in the lower registers or to even read the bass clef. Remember, the violinist doesn't read the bass clef either, so he obviously kept that in mind when composing this piece. No pedal is needed. The most complicated rhythm in this piece is the sextuplet. And although this piece is longer in length than the one I'm about to introduce as our final selection, the skill level required here, let me get that straight, makes it accessible to a lesser advanced student than the 5th piece that I will introduce.
Okay, so obviously I had a lot of fun with this piece. I hope I didn't yammer on too long about the correlation between the violin and the piano. It amused me greatly to talk about it, but I just wanted to hear if we have any other folks that want to weigh in about the violin and this piano piece, or just any other comments that came to mind.
Yeah, a lot of it sounds like a solo violin piece, a piece for solo violin, because you can hear those chords and the double stops.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I was also interested that you've been able to keep up 2 instruments. I'm impressed with that.
Oh, well,
thank you. Myself, but then at the end of high school, I just couldn't do 2 instruments, so I chose the piano.
Yeah, it's actually the violin was my first instrument that I had formal training on, and it was a complete accident. I don't know if any of you had this experience in public school where they would come to the classroom and say, well, if anybody wants to take strings lessons, you can do it as part of your day for 30 minutes and you just sign up, and it was totally a fluke. Like, I have no idea, I was in 5th grade, why I thought that was amazing. Nobody I knew played the violin. I just, for some reason, went for it. And I won't go into too much detail, but later on, my grandfather got involved with the family tree genealogy studies. And we found out that I had 2 elderly aunts that were still living at the time that were concert violinists that I had no idea I was related to. And so then my family was like, aha, that's why you're interested. Because still to this day, nobody else plays the string instruments, any of that. I was just kind of the weird loner over there. So it's kind of my first love. I don't play it as much as I would like, but it is very interesting and it's a beautiful instrument. So yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about, Ruth. So it's a beautiful instrument to study. So anyone else? Q, did you want to say anything? You're so quiet today. I see you over there. Oh, she's good. Okay, all is well.
I just have to share. I apologize for talking so much, but I just
Oh,
have to
please.
share this reaction. You know, as you were playing, I love this piece. It was humorous, as you said, and you commented about having fun with it, but it was humorous to sound. But immediately, I got the picture that came to mind from just having emerged from the COVID quarantine of putting together a crossword puzzle. And it was like you're putting a piece here, you're putting a piece there, that piece, and there was this repetition all the way through of trying one little thing. The chromaticism gave that feeling. It was such a strong impression that I had, and I could not stop thinking about it. And I only did one crossword puzzle the whole time, but it was frustrating. And I just kept thinking of trying to put the pieces. They're very similar, but trying to put a slightly different. No, it was a little different. It didn't quite fit here. I really had fun with this piece, listening.
And it kind of feels like you can look into the process of the composer and what he was thinking, you know, and I like what you said, like, let's try it here. And so I think with the student, it becomes a little more accessible because it's one kind of motive that keeps returning. Well, what does it sound like over here? What does it sound like over there? And I don't know, I'm sure you guys have students that just love to explore composing and writing, you know, even just the little small method books have those opportunities now. Well, what if you, write a 5-measure piece here? And so students that are interested in that, to me, this piece really fits well with them because, like I said, you kind of get to look inside the composer's brain, I feel, and see all those moments. I love the way you put that like a crossword puzzle. That was a really great way to describe it. That was it's like I needed a way to explain it, and there it was. You have it. You said it perfectly. I like that idea. It's very good. So anyone else have any other thoughts? Laura's also being very quiet, so I'm kind of nervous over there. I don't know if she's about to come and say something wonderful and just blow us all away. I don't know, but anybody that wants to say anything. I see Stephanie's up there too. Okay, I don't see any hands going. All right, so we have one last piece. It's a little bit before 11:30, so I think we're actually going to make this before the 2-hour mark. Fingers crossed. All right, so I'm going to mute myself and we'll go back to the presentation.
So we have now reached the last piece in my mini collection. This is L'Histoire des Barbares, or The Petit Elephant, by Francis Poulenc. And you're probably familiar with this composer, but he was born in 1899 and he died in 1963. You may recall he's known for his simplicity. He often incorporated folk tunes and music from the cabaret in his works. His mature pieces, however, show a marked interest in religion, and his music is often ranked with fellow French composer Messiaen. Poulenc's music embraces the tonal and modal systems. Chromaticism, when used, is mostly in passing, and his pieces display his love for beautiful melodies and uncomplicated accompaniments. Some argue that he's the most distinguished composer since the death of Fauré, and Poulenc's intentions to study at the Paris Conservatory, like our other composers we mentioned earlier, were sadly cut short by the early death of his parents. However, he was a pupil of the pianist Ricardo Vignes and was also a member of Les Six, along with Mio earlier. The composer's oeuvre consists of works for chamber music, orchestral music, solo voice, piano music, and dramatic works for the stage. All right, so we're going to dive right into this piece. The story of Babar originates from a French children's book of the same title from the author Jean de Bruenhoff in 1931. So I absolutely love the backstory of this musical piece. The plot centers on the little elephant, Babar, who is orphaned after his mother is killed by a hunter. So it's rather a dark start to this book by Jean de Bruenhoff. To avoid capture, the baby elephant runs away through the forest until he reaches a town. There he meets a rich old lady who takes him under her wing and eases him in to human society by buying him fancy clothes and teaching him manners. The story ends by returning to his elephant friends and family, and he gets married and becomes the king of the elephants. So it has a very positive ending after a rather dark start there. Note that this piece actually is an excerpt from much longer work of the same title for narrator and piano by Poulenc, And the text, of course, comes from the book. In its original state, the complete piano solo and narration is 31 pages long, and it's about 22 minutes when performed. The chosen musical excerpt of our discussion is a stylized waltz that breaks into the story after the old lady befriends Babar and gives him money to buy clothes, to which he replies, "Thank you, madame." So Poulenc sets this piece in A flat major, so there's a very strong tonic chord present in the first and the final measures of this piece. Each section ends on the tonic or dominant 7th chord. The waltz bass is prevalent throughout this piece, very recognizable. The composition features a returning theme that is contrasted by new material. The theme returns twice with alterations in the supporting accompaniment, and then you can see on the outline below, we have the A section, first 6 measures, and then the B section starting at measure 7. The A prime returns at measure 11, C section at measure 15, and then we finally conclude with that last reiteration of the A section. We're going to pause here and take a listen to this wonderful piece. Well, as we heard, this work borrows from the Romantic era character piece, in which a short instrumental solo is intended to convey a story, a mood. There's no way to get away from that in this piece, and I, in fact, embrace it. I love it. Poulenc enhances this experience with that actual story being narrated and intertwined with the music. So it'd be a really cool exercise, perhaps, for you and your students, should you choose this piece, to listen to the entire score with the narration. I will say the original book is in French, so I don't know, you might be able to find an English translation performance of that, but just hearing it in context would really enrich the process for you and your student. The regular use of that low bass voice on the downbeat of most measures and the selection of the moderate tempo is possibly characterizing that unhurried walk of a large elephant. Elephants don't really run, they don't move very quickly. And so I love the way that he brings that into the character of the piece. The solo also features a variety of registers and ranges, as you heard. The left hand borrows that standard Chopin accompanimental style, and that the measure typically begins with a low octave single note followed by inverted triads in the higher range. You can see this on the score below. Just this very first measure here, you can see the low A flat and then inversions of that A flat major chord. There's also larger reaches in the left hand and the right hand. So L'Histoire de Babar continues that student's growth from Les Fleurs Endormies, in which the leaping of the hand was used in some extent in the B section. Now this skill is needed virtually every measure for this piece. So if you choose to use these two pieces in a graduated manner, I think you would find some great connections for your student there. The left hand is very mobile. However, its primary function is accompanimental. So it might be necessary to review balancing techniques such as ghosting, or some people call it the shadow practicing, where you play the low downbeat there and then you simply touch the keys for the chords, but you don't actually press in. So you ghost over the top of the keys. You're not actually creating sound, but you're trying to make sure that you keep that softer balance in the left hand chords where you can hear the beautiful right hand melody. So ghosting or shadow practicing, you may have taught that many times in your studio, I'm sure. The right hand is also required in many places to move across a wide range of notes in a short amount of time. So there's ascending arpeggiated sweeps that are marking the middle and the end points of the piece. Poulenc here is using an inverted A-flat major triad played across 3 octaves, yes, 3 octaves, as a brilliant splash of color before moving into new melodic material. So you can see this on the score at the end of this measure. You have basically this gigantic grace note leading to beats 2 and 3 on measure 14. And then measure 15, you can just see by a quick glance, this looks different in the right hand than anything that has been played so far, anything that I've shown you in the musical example. So we'll get to that in just a moment. The piece ends at measure 28 with a similar arch to the upper registers with another A-flat major triad. However, you'll notice here in the musical example that the composer adds F-flat, G, and C-flat right before that final chord. So one may notice that F-flat, C-flat, and G are functioning as chromatic neighboring tones to that A-flat major triad. So as the final 8th note does release the tension by creating half steps with the return to the A-flat major, perhaps Poulenc's intentions were to give a little chromatic color instead of just ending that expected way. You'll notice that the left hand, that low dotted half note at the beginning, is written as a full measure note. So you would actually hold the pedal even through those chromatic neighbor tones. So it really is part of that complete measure sound. And then that leads me right to modern harmonies and chromaticism. So Poulenc's examples of brilliant chromaticism combine with accented notes. So this is what I was just giving you a preview of earlier. So this is measure 15 and measure 18 in this example. In each bar, there's a dramatic flourish of the right hand descending to, in this case, the bass C flat. Whew. Bass clef is not shown on the screen here, but actually the left hand is playing in the bass clef. So my apologies, that was a mistake on my part. So the left hand is in the bass clef and the right hand is in the bass clef. You notice that the left hand will swoop over the right hand at one point, and so by beat 3 of measure 15, you're in the treble clef left hand. So it's a lot of hand crossing there to think about. So about the chromaticism though, returning to that topic, these are the only bars in the piece specifically marked forte. They definitely signify a change of mood as well as volume. Perhaps this section is best understood as Babar having a flashback to that traumatic event of his mother's death. Remember, he was just a small elephant calf here, and seeing that, witnessing that had to be traumatic. So when I was thinking about this piece, I thought, you know what? This is so different than anything else that he's doing in the previous sections. I feel like that's really portraying the traumatic event there. So we'll pause and have a quick audio clip there. A beautifully handled sequence of descending chromaticism is also found earlier in the piece at measures 7 through 8. So you're going to see here in the upper right hand, you've got these extremely high ranges, and of the right hand also you see there in that first measure an octave higher above that. So we're looking here at B double flat followed by A flat. So B double flat followed by A flat. So that's a half step. You have at the bar line crossing there the G to F sharp, another half step, and then moving forward on that last measure, F natural moving to E, a half step, and then E right at the end of the measure, you have E to E flat. So all of this chromaticism there in that right hand, just descending in that right hand part. In conjunction with the previous passage, the left hand has beautiful harmonies in the following measures 9 through 10 that are also propelled by that half step relationship. So with the hand consistently spanning the minor 7th interval, E flat, D flat, so these are the outer voices of the left hand, the inner voices moving chromatically, G, A flat, and then B double flat there. So you find that outer voices stay the same, the inner voice moving by a half step. Okay, so that gives you just a quick idea, but there's so much chromaticism there. You'll really enjoy sharing those studies with your student. And as you also heard on the recording, complex rhythms are prevalent. So the first example I'm going to share with you is that even from the beginning of this piece, dotted and double dotted tied notes followed by 30-second rhythms appear often and require that the student consistently subdivide. This is not something you want to put at a guess. You definitely want to count carefully. So in example 5-7, which you can see, this sort of intricacy is found in measures 1 through 4. So in beginning at measure 2, each bar presents a quarter beat tied to a double dotted eighth note beginning at beat 2. Every dotted eighth note is followed by 1 or 2 30-second notes. The downbeat of measures 3 through 4 also contain another dotted eighth note followed by a 30-second note. This time there's no ties present, so a little bit of relief there. So the opening measure does contain the previously mentioned tied rhythmic figure as well as additional dotted eighth followed by 30-second notes. However, they are presented in a different order on the first measure, the tied notes being on the downbeat. So I'm showing you all these musical examples on the screen as I'm talking through this. You can kind of visually follow through there. So we will pause if you want to hear an audio clip of this. So it's challenging. It's challenging for students to keep a steady tempo while incorporating these complicated rhythms because they initially seem to go against that basic pulse. But you notice the left hand is providing a steady quarter beat accompaniment that kind of gives us our baseline here to count against. So hearing the left hand's entrances on the beat while that right hand is continuing to hold tied notes is crucial in maintaining a steady tempo. So you probably need to do some work with your student on that in the studio. Complex rhythms, for example, 2, Poulenc does not limit rhythmic difficulties to the dotted and tied notes only. He goes one step farther. So we also find triplets and sextuplets in the space of an eighth note or quarter note. So this is measure 7 through 8. And we were looking at this earlier in terms of chromaticism, but you may have noticed while we're talking about that, the rhythm's a bit complicated. The sextuplet rhythms can be problematic. They are made more difficult here by the addition of the dotted 16th rest. So the students must first identify the location of the 3/4 beats, aided by that left hand steady accompaniment. Without that foundation, the more complex material will not clearly be understood. So if you look on the screen, I pointed out the on top of the right hand portion, the counting there. So you have the eighth note 1E, and then so you have the end of the sextuplet with the B double flat there playing, and then it goes to the downbeat of 2 with A flat. So you're hearing that rhythm lining up very carefully. So what you want to try especially is once you get that right hand rhythm sorted out against the quarter note in the left hand is to match the hands together entrances. Both bars have an eighth note at the beginning of each beat. So I'll say at least an eighth note. Of course, the left hand is mostly quarter notes there. So there's a quarter note on beat 3 that matches between both hands. So this helps visual and aural organization. The sextuplet falls on the second half of the first and the third beat. So the eighth note at the beginning of the measure should initially be subdivided into sixteenths when you're first starting out, counted as 1E, or however you count it, with the sextuplet following. The dotted 16th rest that begins with the sextuplet equals 1.5 sixteenths. So one may count that as and As the dotted rest does not complete the final 16th, the 32nd notes at the end of the sextuplet occur at exactly halfway through the 16th's rhythmic value. Orally, the sextuplets really kind of sound like a grace note figure before the downbeat, as the score requires the student to perform these rhythms either on or immediately after the final 16th of the measure. So I'm just going to conclude this rhythmic studies portion and say it's interesting to notice how the composer focuses a large portion of the right hand movement on the 4th 16th of the beat. The author and pianist Levine advises students to look at the rhythm of the composition as part of the personality of this piece. So as this rhythm is prevalent throughout the work, perhaps it's meant to convey that ungainly lumbering of the tired traveling elephant from our story. The narration that precedes this musical portion in the larger work begins after some days, tired and footsore, he came to a town. All right, so we're going to take a break from that and talk about how can we link this piece to French repertoire. Well, there's layers of textures and voicing melody versus accompaniment in Babar. These are the same skills needed in Debussy's Reverie. And so you can see a little bit of the score here that I excerpted for you. And you see within both hands, we have at least the two voices there and measures 9 through 10. And then of course, in measure 19, the right hand is playing these intervals together. These are the stemmed half notes, and then you have the whole note throughout the whole measure, all on the right hand, and the left hand is doing these sweeping gestures with the eighth notes. Okay, so for what students would this piece be appropriate? Suitable for the advanced student, obviously. You may be a student preparing for pre-college, and even a first-year undergraduate. I actually presented this to one of my undergraduate students at the college I teach at, and it was a great introduction. It had some of the more advanced techniques, definitely dove into the modern era, but it wasn't a really lengthy piece. And with the returning A sections, the student feels like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with this passage, and so it kind of gives them a little bit of a sense of grounding. Also, the use of sensitive pedaling and voicing of melody versus accompaniment. Well, you got to have a really well-developed ear and excellent coordination between the hands and the feet. So not every student is going to be able to jump right into this piece. The complicated rhythm needs precise counting, attention to detail, and that means that we're hoping the student has experience with metronome practice and obviously an ability to subdivide. The chromaticism in larger range is exciting and challenging technically, but the piece's short length may be considered a plus. So this concludes the 5 pieces that I am sharing with you today. So first of all, I want to say thank you for staying tuned. I know this was quite a few pieces to share with you, but my sincere hope is that you may be able to take 1 or 2 of them or even all 5 and use them in your studio, again, with one student, or maybe you can pick and choose what fits best for the student needs that you currently have and are working with. So if you're interested, there's a lot of information in my dissertation. And so I didn't cover everything today. We're trying to be aware and cognizant of the time restraints. So if you are interested in getting the entire document, you can go to ProQuest, PROQUEST, and just search for my name as the author. And you actually can get a downloadable PDF free of charge. So if you're looking for a specific piece that, hey, I really want to work on this with my student, you can get all the information that I did the research about through that PDF. If you do want a hardcover book, there is one available, but I will say it's a little bit pricey, so you might just want to go with that PDF free of charge. And also, if you're trying to get copies of the book, the Bilodeau edition, for example, of these 5 pieces, they're sometimes a little difficult to find, but I actually have seen them on sale at Midwest Sheet Music. So even if they don't have them immediately in stock, I'm sure that they could order them for you, but they're not available through Amazon at this time. So just wanted to kind of give you a few bits of information there at the end. Thank you so much for watching today, and I hope that I have encouraged and inspired you and your students with these 5 French modern pieces.
Well, thank you guys so much for hanging in there. I appreciate that. I did misspeak on that recording. So I did find some of these pieces on Amazon. So you might be able to find the one that you're looking for. I don't think I was able to find all of them, but I did find some. So anyway, I just wanted to give you guys a chance to respond. I'm sure some of you have probably heard the Poulenc piece or played it. So if you wanted to share, and of course, I wanted to show you too, this is also available this is the entire piece and its full piano and narrator. So it's really great. It's quite lengthy, as I mentioned. And there's also an orchestral version of it. So you can go on YouTube and find the orchestral version. And some of they do it obviously in French, and it's really cute to watch all the kids respond, but they do have different versions. You can watch orchestras, and sometimes they have little reenactments with Babar, and they have actual actors. So it's really quite charming. And even if you just do the one excerpt, it's worth watching the whole thing, in my opinion. So
So the Billaudot publisher only published that one excerpt. That was just.
Yeah, so they pull, so
Okay.
this collection, the 27 pieces, was for young people. So there are some very difficult pieces in the whole Babar collection that he wrote. So they just excerpted this one. And so it is complete on its own. The piece is complete on its own, as you heard. But yeah, it's a larger work that if you have a more advanced student, you could explore for sure. Yeah. I wanted to pause, and I do want to hear any other comments you have. I think did I see a hand, Laura? Oh, yes, please say something.
I just wanted to say about l'histoire de Babar. I think that piece would be really good for a high school student who's into kind of like jazz a little bit and blues a little bit, because of when the low register comes in about the elephant, that to me sounds very bluesy. And then the arpeggios over hand arpeggios, I just think it's more, it sounds more improvisational and more jazzy and more bluesy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great comment. I didn't think about that, the improvisational. That's a very good way to explain that section. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. That's a great comment. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in? I know we've been talking for a while, but there's all these pieces, so you might be a little weary. I did want to say thank you to Helen and to Q and all the executive board at SLAMTA for allowing me to do this and being so kind and giving me an opportunity to share these pieces. I hope you can get some use out of them. That's really what I'm sharing all this for. Yeah.
I just have a question to ask, like everybody. It's a little bit, it's a related question. It's not about that piece, but just, hearing you talk about all these pieces, the thing that's in my head a lot is, again, how to get students interested in these sort of alternative, like, unusual sounding pieces from an earlier age, like from, say, the advanced beginner age. What besides this repertoire that we've been talking about today do you use to supplement even students that are still in like the method books? Kind of advanced beginner, other composers. I mean, I've often thought about introducing the microcosmos, but I hesitate because I think they're not going to like the sound of it.
I'll share that I had a student who learned some of the very early microcosmos pieces and really loved Bartok, inspired by Bartok. When he was on recital, that captured the imagination of other students. So if you can get one student to really, dig it, then possibly that will be contagious. I found that happened in my studio. Once they heard the piece that was beautifully performed and it was impressive, and Okay,
that's great advice. Yeah, because I know. I mean, I know that some of my students reject anything that sounds weird, you know.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that's a fear we all share as teachers, because they're just not exposed. A lot of the students aren't exposed to this. So Laura, was it you? Somebody had said something when we were actually in person a while ago, this is at least over a year, about having recitals with your students and bringing in, different themes like for your recitals, and even maybe bringing in like, media, maybe pictures, or, have the students draw something that they think goes with their piece. And so I think, bringing in a portion of that, I really love what Karen said, kind of introducing it through, via one student who is interested, or even introduce it yourself, and say, wow, look at this. This is so different than Bach. This is so different than, what you're going to hear from a sonatina or from a small waltz of Chopin or something like that. And maybe, you would find somebody that would jump in, with both feet. You can use that student to kind of be the vehicle. But I feel like part of what maybe I sermonize too much in lessons, I don't know, but I'm like, part of music is that we want you to try things that are new, that maybe you aren't familiar with, because the human nature says, if it's new or unfamiliar, we don't like it. We just throw up our guard. We all do. I mean, that's just, and so I have these conversations with students. I'm like, well, would you try it? Would you give it a try and open your mind? Just explore something new that's part of our education. You don't have to love it. You don't have to be like, this is my favorite piece ever, but you have to try it. And so I found like I kind of grudgingly pull them along. And then after a while, they're like, oh, wow, I think I enjoyed this more than I meant to. And so that's the happy teacher moments. I don't always get them, but I try.
Yeah, I like what you said. You don't have to love it. That's what that's what we used to tell our kid who didn't want her vegetables. We used to say, you don't have to like it,
I'm just a real kind of honest, straightforward teacher like that. So, I remember one of the pieces I studied, and I didn't have any connection with it. My teacher was like, you're going to learn this. And I was like, I don't want to. I was horrible. I said it. And I felt so horrible. I was like, why did you act like that, Sharla? It was awful. But, I was like, I'm going to do it. I felt so bad. I was like, I'm going to learn this piece. And I ended up loving it after all. But it was just so foreign to what I had previously studied that I was like, no way, So I kind of drew from my own experience to kind of just try it, with my students, and give them a little incentive, let them play a piece they really like, if they will, maybe.
I like the idea of the theme recital too. Like everybody plays one far out piece,
Yeah.
I kind of like that.
So it's not original with me. Somebody else, we had a whole
Yeah.
discussion about this. Laura, I thought you had maybe kind of somebody did. But yeah, I've kind of been marinating on that for a while because it was an amazing idea. Yeah.
I think Karen is right about the recital, because I know that Miss Schindler has a lot of her students playing very contemporary pieces, and then actually I guess it's always during the MMTA audition time. Actually, some of the pieces recycles, and I find like my daughter, for example, she gets really excited playing some piece that other kid played, and go, oh, I want to play that piece.
Yeah.
So, I think for teachers, sometimes I hate recycling pieces because, you just hear it so often and you get sick of it. But it's actually good for the students because they're kind of like waiting for their turn. And they think, oh, my level is up to here now because I get to play this piece. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely. I said earlier before we actually started, but I did want to do a shout out. You can see my husband you can't see his picture, but he actually put together all this presentation, recorded it, edited it. He does this professionally for a living. Don't give any credit to me for if you thought it looked anyway good, because I don't know how to do all that. Just play the piano. So Stephen, if you can hear me, I know he's actually running other meetings right now at work, but he's doing both at once. So I just want to say thank you for that. And again, oh, you're here. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. Really good.
There you are.
There I am. I'm here. Thank you.
Yes, we appreciated that. I don't have any skills in that area, so I just married somebody who did. So
That works.
yeah, it works. So
Well, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. You're welcome, honey.
All right. So I'm going to hand it back to Helen or Q if you guys wanted to have any closing remarks. But I
just want to thank Sharla so much. This is such a thorough nice presentation. So clear. I feel like I'm, it's very professional. I'm so sorry there are not a lot of people here. I did talk to some of the other music teacher friends, and then 2 of them mentioned that they didn't get the email, which I'm kind of surprised. So I don't know. I'm gonna check with our secretary to see, maybe she doesn't have everyone on the list, or maybe it went to the junk mail. That could be possible. But I'm just so sorry that a lot of people missed this. Is such a great presentation. I'm glad that everything's recorded so that we get to watch it again. So maybe we'll send an email, on that, so people who actually missed it. This is one great thing about Zoom, because we always get to rewatch things if we didn't catch certain things. So, but thank you so much. Sharla.
A small group is fun too.
Yeah. Everybody gets to talk.
Yeah. It was more intimate this way. So I think it worked well. Yes. Yeah. Oh, cute.
So Sharla, it was wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And I think it was very informative. And I like the way you putting up with the different levels, the difficulties. And then, it was very specific and, detailed. So I really liked it. It was very, very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I liked how you reflect into WC pieces or here and then there. Or sonatine on the Ravel. It's very nice. It's very thorough. It's just very informative. Thank you so much, Sharla.
And you play the pieces beautifully too.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't know if it was more nerve-wracking recording the pieces or playing them live. That was the first time I'd done 5 in a row, trying to record it. And it was like, this is a whole new world than playing, on a stage at a recital or even a lecture recital. It just felt so different, that it took me a few tries to kind of get, oh, okay, so we can do this, it just felt different to have a camera right over you. It was a whole different, but thank you. I appreciate your kind comments so much. And it's just been a pleasure. I spent a lot of time researching all of this, and I am kind of a thorough person. So I tried to scale back so I didn't overwhelm. But I love digging in for all the details, and I just go down deep. But hopefully it was enough to be helpful without overwhelming. So from there. So. All right. Well, thank you guys. I think we'll pause here for today, and fingers crossed that sometime in the near future, we'll be able to see each other in person again. And thank you to our program chair, Helen, and of course, our president, Q. Thank you for being here, and everyone else that's just making wonderful comments and helping this presentation go well. Have a great afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thank you,
Bye,
Sharla.
everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Terrific.